So this is part 2 of the video that I'm doing on the new fuel, which is the E10 fuel, which is 10% ethanol and 90% petroleum. So it's recently come to the UK, and some of the older cars are thought not to do very well with it. So I'm going to be talking through it whilst we're looking at this display here. So this is part 2. Part 1 will give you more information on this display, but this is now about 4 days on, and you can see the fuel trims are settling down, so they're more towards the 0 mark, where it's like 2.3 and minus 0.8, minus 3.1, they add towards 0, which is the good thing. This is again a little bit off, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was before. And I think what's happened is, when I put the ethanol in, it's a solvent, and it's supposed to be like one of the best solvents out there, just second to water. So a solvent, why is this such a good solvent, this particular one, ethanol? Because it's able to dissolve both oil-based and water-based components as well. So it's basically crossed it over between water-based stains and alcohol-based stains. It basically removes everything. So the problem here lies in older engines. It will clean up everything in the engine, and where's it going to go? It's going to go all that crud, etc., and all these little dirty bits will then fire through the injectors and create a little bit of problems when you initially put them in. Now that can lead to starting problems depending on how much crud you've got in there, and also misfiring. And maybe you might find an engine cleaner, a petrol cleaner additive may help keep the injectors clean initially during the first stages of actually using this. So this is the E10 one, which I put into the car, and as I said, the trims are actually settling down. We're now going to take it for a drive, and I will talk you through. So you've got two types. You've got E5 as well, which is under super unleaded. So keep an eye on these trims, and you can see them adjusting. The super unleaded, now that one is E5, so it's only got 5% ethanol in it, which is less than 10%. So with ethanol, as I said, is a superb solvent. It's able to attract water into itself. Now that's a problem, because the petrol stored over a long period of time, the ethanol will try to attract any humidity in it, and if the petrol's not moved around and jumbled around, then and it's left in like months just sitting there until you go on a holiday, etc., then there's a very good possibility that the ethanol will separate from the petroleum altogether. Now this is one of the problems with storing fuel over a long period of time, then, is that the ethanol will separate. Now the ethanol in water is much denser than petroleum, so what it will be is like a biphasic settlement. So basically the ethanol in water will settle at the bottom, and the petroleum will separate at the top. Now bearing in mind that the fuel pump situated at the bottom is going to pull in that ethanol and water. Now that cannot be good for the car engine, so that's something you have to be really careful with when storing. If you're using E10, be careful with that. Now if you're looking at using E10 to actually save money, this may not be the best idea, because fundamentally ethanol is not a great component to actually have in a car engine. It's there for a reason. It's there because it's an oxygenated chemical, so it has the ability to actually, it's got its own oxygen built into it, unlike petroleum, so therefore it burns cleaner. Now this means less carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, carbon monoxide emissions into the planet, but also the fact that we've got to grow the products to actually make the ethanol, and that's a byproduct of that also can be fed to animals. This all helps the planet to maintain a carbon neutrality and reverse some of the problems that we've caused with motor vehicles. So let's go back. Yeah, I've said to you that ethanol is not a great component. Look at these figures. These are so much better than last time. They're not jumping, they're not going up to 10s and 12s, etc. They're sitting around where I want them to be sitting around. But nonetheless, ethanol is not a great component to have in cars. So we're talking about, does it damage your car? Well, let's just say that ethanol, by its nature, basically dissolves dirt, dissolves components, but also it weakens rubber components. Now rubber will degrade with time when exposed to ethanol. Whether it's in a big concentration or little concentration, it will degrade in time. It's just a matter of time. So, will it degrade in the lifetime of the Alphard? Possibly, possibly not. Nobody really knows. But one thing we do know is going to 5% fuel will be better than going to 10% fuel. Okay, because once it starts to go, it's not going to just eat away one component. It will eat away many, many components. I don't think this is just related to cars of 2002, 2003, 2008, etc. I think even the new cars will struggle. You know, it all depends on how long the government or the car manufacturers want us to have these cars around. Essentially, I think these fuels will lead to degradation of cars, rubber components over a period of time, but the cars may fail on another basis. They may fail through car accidents, through the inability to run them because they're costing too much, rust, corrosion. It doesn't matter, there's lots of things. However, we as Alphard owners, Japanese car import owners, we want to make these cars last as long as possible. These are looking much better, aren't they, these fuel trims? We want to make them last as long as possible. The other thing with ethanol, it also degrades certain metals. The biggest ones are aluminium and zinc, so they start to degrade as well. Once that metal starts to degrade, it loses the smooth surfaces, and we're talking about valves and bits and pieces like that, which can go carburetors in old cars, not now Japanese cars, because they're injected, but carburetors are also often made of aluminium, and these things can go. So basically the metals can also fail in this vehicle. So they've got a whole bunch of components which are going to fail. So what would be my thoughts? Well, my thoughts are this is sitting down quite nicely, so the car's adjusting into it. I think when I switch to the E5 or super unleaded, I'm going to see a similar kind of fluctuation initially into the wild numbers, and then it will understand this is a different type of fuel, and then it will just settle down. Now this brings in another line. If the fuel that we're using, if it makes a big difference to the vehicle, where you're getting the fuel from, then also we've got to be in mind that if we're buying fuel from different places, then the vehicle is going to have to learn how to read that particular fuel for the car, and that's going to mean a little bit of ill running whilst or miss, you know, like just the vehicle not running to its maximum capacity whilst it learns about that fuel. So I would say if you're buying from Tesco, buy from Tesco. If you're buying from Costco, buy from Costco. Stick to the same place where you can do, and that will mean that ECU won't have to learn as much as it does. But so far, as I said, these are looking like healthy trims. So will it run on E10? The answer is well, it's running a lot better on E10. I even lost that initial drag of the vehicle as I started off. I mentioned that number one, that it felt like the vehicle was being held back. That's now gone, so you can see that it's still got its little bit of a pickup now, but I'm quite happy the way the car's running nicely now. It's not jerking around, it's not giving me aggro, but listen, you know what, as I said, don't put the high ethanol into the vehicle if you can avoid it. Just go down to the 5%. We don't know how long it will take. If it takes 50,000, 67,000 for the cars to start feeling the effects of this, and that's fine, because these cars will probably be not at the top of your mind. So I would probably stick to using the E5 and just suck it up. If you're wondering that whether there'll be a big decrease in MPG versus cost, and from listening to other people, no, I don't think you are going to get a big problem with fuel rises increasing. And if you've got LPG, you're using a very little amount of fuel. Now that's quite an interesting one. With LPG, you may find that you probably want to keep a little bit more fuel than the base amount. You know, you don't want to put a whole tank there because you won't be using much of it, but you don't want to be using too little either, because, as I mentioned earlier, that crud, etc., will be dissolved by that by the ethanol, and will release itself over a period of time. This will lead to a cleaner engine, but certainly initially, I think what you'll find is that your car will run rough, and you know, maybe the E10 for the first load was probably not a bad idea. Cleans out the engine, etc. But certainly you'll find that your car will run cleaner, and and as I said, it's good for the planet, good for everybody, good for the kids, and good for the environment and global warming if we can switch away from this. To me also it feels that maybe this is the way that the government feels that they'll edge these petrol vehicles out over a period of time, either by making them expensive to actually repair, but I don't think the car manufacturers are kicking up too much of a fuss because they want us to switch to electric as well. Well, I hope that has been useful, and as you can see, these figures are so much better than last week. So yes, it does settle down. As I said, I wouldn't be rushing to use E10 because you may end up with problems. So E5, as I said, is probably the better one. You're more likely to have less problems if you have any additives. Does adding additives to this make any difference? I just think it's going to be snake oil. I think personally that the additives won't be doing much for the vehicle. You'll be adding on it. Might as well just buy the unleaded, super unleaded, and be done with it. Well, listen, thank you so much for listening to this. As I said, I'll do another one when I get down to using the E10 to show you the numbers that I get from that and if it makes a difference.